RT is sitting down with award-winning journalist Matt Kennard. Thank you very much for joining us today, Matt.
Thank you for having me.
Now, my first question to you is about the series of essays that you wrote that's become very popular, Irregular Army, focusing on all sorts of flaws within the United States Army, from neo-Nazism to alcoholism and to kind of less serious issues like people being overweight in the Army. When you were working on this, which one of these topics was the most shocking for you when you were researching?
The neo-Nazis is obviously the most shocking because these people hate everything to do with the Middle East, and their goal is to kill what they call Hajis. So obviously that's a shocking result of the war on terror, as the mainstream narrative is that we, the West, are taking democracy to Iraq and Afghanistan, but yet we're sending these neo-Nazi troops to do it. So, but I mean, that's the most shocking. But again, gangbangers is another one, which is gang members from all over the West Coast have been in the military since 2002. They are not committing atrocities in the same way that the neo-Nazis are, but again, the military is trying to take them out now.
Now, this whole issue of neo-Nazism in the Army, how did it come about? How did you come across this? And when did you realize it's actually a much bigger issue than people might think?
Well, I knew when I went to graduate school that there was a problem with the US military in that they couldn't get enough recruits. And they were explicit about allowing felons in and people with low IQs. They changed the regulations so they could get more people into the US military. Whereas with Nazism, obviously, it's not going to play as well in society, so they kept that low. So I decided to investigate via FOIA requests, via interviewing neo-Nazi soldiers that had returned from Iraq and Afghanistan. And what I uncovered, basically after 6 months of investigation, was that this was a military-wide phenomenon that had been allowed to happen under the Bush administration, under the cover of the press. No one was actually covering it. They were covering other sections of the military, but not this specific phenomenon. So I spent the next year looking into it and eventually published it. And even after publication, the US military made no comment on it. So they have done nothing about it.
Do you have some numbers as to sort of how many people do see themselves as neo-Nazis?
Well, it's difficult because the US military don't keep specific data on neo-Nazis. They couple them together with gang members, so it's impossible to say. Although there have been FBI reports that they said they uncovered 203 neo-Nazi veterans, but in terms of hard numbers, there's nothing really.
What about social networking sites? They really sometimes tend to give away the numbers of people who are neo-Nazis, who are racist in the military, because they come out and publicly say it on, websites like Facebook, for example.
Yeah, well, there's quite a funny website called newsaxon.org, which is Facebook for neo-Nazis. So I did quite a lot of research on that. But again, with social networking sites, people can say what they want. It doesn't have to be true, so it's quite hard to build a case for this phenomenon on people showing off on a neo-Nazi website, because you have no proof that what they're saying is correct. But I mean, a lot of it is very shocking. We looked at newsaxon.org, and we looked at websites like Facebook, and I mean, there was a lot of bravado about, I'm going out to the desert to kill Iraqis, I'm doing my mission as a white militant, this sort of thing. So yeah, I mean, as a shocking phenomenon, it is shocking, but it's not the whole deal.
What are the consequences of this? When a person like that leaves the military, do they go out and train other people?
Part of the mission is to go and kill brown people in the Middle East, but also to bring the training back to the US to start what they call a race war, which they envision as a war between all the races in America, and eventually the white nationalists will take power. I mean, it's a crazy idea, but these people really believe it, and there's enough of them to make it a very worrying phenomenon. I mean, and coupled together with the fact that gang members are bringing back a lot of expertise in military training to the United States. Certain people within the gangs and certain neo-Nazis said to me that they hope that the US will erupt in a bloody revolution.
Have you wondered whether or not the US officials might be somehow interested in this, in terms of if they have someone that aggressive inside the military, they don't have to worry about, more emotional sides like post-traumatic stress disorder or something like that?
Well, I think neo-Nazis can still get post-traumatic stress disorder, but having talked to the neo-Nazi troops, or some of the neo-Nazi troops that went to Iraq, they did say that their superiors were who were aware of their opinions, often sent them on missions which were seen as the more dangerous ones because they were what they called hardcore. So there is a there's a military interest in having hardcore troops, or troops that have a sort of warlike mentality. But I actually don't think the US military, this is a conscious thing that they've done. This is basically something they've had to do because they can't get enough troops. So it's not an ideological preference for neo-Nazis, it's more to do with the fact they can't get enough troops, so they have quietly got rid of the regulations.
Now, you said that the US military started hiring people when they kicked off the war on terror and didn't really check their backgrounds. What about now? I mean, is this still the situation, or was this something that was going on only during the Bush era?
The Bush era is where it all kicked off because obviously they were missing their targets by huge amounts and the occupation forces were huge. The occupation in Iraq is now winding down, plus the fact that the financial crisis has put a lot of people out of work, so it's made the military more attractive. So in terms, at this stage it's not critical, but what has happened is the regulations that were changed during the war on terror at its height haven't been changed back. So they still have the same legal framework or the same recruitment framework, but yet there's probably less people like that going into it.
Talk to me about some of the other topics that you cover in this set of essays, like drug use in the Army, post-traumatic stress disorders that are not being treated well enough.
Right, well, post-traumatic stress is a really interesting one, obviously, because these are young Americans that are coming back here and often either committing suicide or committing crimes against other people. And the US military, because they've been so starved of troops, have often sent them back for second and third tours of duty. So that's a huge phenomenon. That has actually been written about quite a lot, and it's causing quite a lot of anger within the military and within, obviously, the families of these young men. Drug users, again, I got information through the Freedom of Information Act from the US military, which looked at the discharges for different reasons. And if you look on a sort of graph of the discharges for drug abuse and alcoholism, it's gone right down. Now, unless the troops have really cleaned up their act for some unknown reason, that means that the US military are refusing to kick out people who are on drugs and alcoholics in Iraq and Afghanistan. So that's again worrying. But worrying for the US military, but again, really worrying for the occupied population, because they are under a military that is at the end of its tether, really. And is populated with alcoholics, drug abusers.
When the soldiers actually leave the Army, do you have a kind of a larger picture painted in terms of how well they're being taken care of, these veterans?
Well, under Bush it was terrible. He cut a lot of money going to veteran healthcare. Obama's been slightly better, but the volume is just huge. I mean, as of September 2008, I think 1.6 million Americans had served in Iraq and Afghanistan. So that's the population of Philadelphia or Estonia, or a country like Estonia. So that's a hell of a lot of people, and the system is at the end of its tether. So these people aren't being looked after in the way they should be, and are often being sent back into the combat after doctors have said they have certain syndromes or certain PTSD-related syndromes.
What about the homosexual community in the US military?
The narrative is that the Bush administration is, well, in fact it's true, was one of the most conservative administrations in American history, and on most issues of state they were the most conservative. But on homosexuals, in the military, they seem to have saved their liberalism for that, because if you talk to gay rights groups, they say that under the Bush administration they had the best time they've ever had in the military, which shows you that this isn't an ideological preference of the Bush administration. It's basically the fact that they haven't got enough troops, so they don't care who they put in, whether it contradicts their own ideology or not. When
you talk to these soldiers who are serving in the US Army, what did they tell you in terms of how they see the wars that the US is involved in?
There's some that are very gung-ho. There's some that are very anti-war. I mean, it's hard to generalize over a whole soldier population. I talked to a lot of veterans from the Iraq Veterans Against the War. I mean, on the topic of neo-Nazism, they were saying they weren't surprised by the prevalence of neo-Nazism in the US military, because in essence the war is racist, because the occupation is racist.
How do you see the way the US mainstream media covers these wars?
Across the mainstream spectrum of the United States, the wars have been supported by liberals and conservatives. I mean, there's a lot of anger with the Bush administration amongst the liberal elite, because they say that the war has been prosecuted badly and there wasn't any planning. But essentially this idea that we wanted to take democracy to Iraq and Afghanistan is never questioned. So I think that that is a massive failing of the US media. And I mean, in the build-up to the war in Iraq, the US media really didn't do its duty in contradicting the propaganda that was coming out of the Bush administration.
So what are some of the tougher questions that the US media should be asking about both Iraq and Afghanistan, do you think?
That's quite simple. I mean, are we there to spread democracy and create a Middle East free of tyranny, or are we there because we want to secure the resources that are there? That's a basic fundamental question that is not asked. I mean, and the answer is quite simple. Iraq has the second biggest reserves of oil in the whole world. Afghanistan is also in a vital geostrategic region. For me, it's quite obvious why we're there, but the US mainstream media, and to a large degree the UK media, doesn't seem to be asking that question.
Do you think these wars should have been avoided altogether, both Iraq and Afghanistan? Do you think the US would have been better off if they never went in there?
Without a doubt, in Iraq was an illegal war. I mean, the most senior legal officials say that. That's killed 1 million people by some estimates, 1 million Iraqis, 2 million refugees, a country basically devastated, malnutrition at high levels. So I can't see how anyone could have a justification for that kind of devastation of a country, especially under a false premise, because if you remember, we went there for weapons of mass destruction, which have never been found. Afghanistan, there was tenuous legality to the war, but essentially there was some tenuous basis for the war in that the Taliban were sheltering Al-Qaeda, so that you can make an argument for it. I think having occupied it now for 8 years and seeing that the Taliban are resurgent and we have done absolutely nothing to make the lives of Afghanis any better, both wars, Iraq especially, shouldn't have been fought.
Matt Kennard, thank you very much for your time with us today.
Thanks for having me.